Hello, everyone, and welcome to Only in San Jose, a podcast aimed at democratizing the process of civic participation in local government. For those of you joining us for the first time, welcome. So right now, Only in San Jose, OSJ for short. And on that note, as we kind of dig into local government, there's a lot of acronyms, and I'll do my best to try and identify and make sure that we spell it out for everybody. So, right now, we are focusing specifically on the City of San Jose 2021 Charter Review Commission and the CRC. And the CRC is studying the city charter, which is, essentially our city constitution. So to understand whether our city governance structure is appropriately suited to meet the complex needs of our contemporary community, such as examining the relationship between the mayor, council, and the city manager's office. And so in this episode, we'll be discussing the office of the city manager, what it is, and why it's important. So a city manager is an official that is appointed as the administrative manager of a city in a council manager form of city government, which is the City of San Jose. And people serving in this position are sometimes referred to as the chief executive officer or, CEO, or a chief administrative officer, CAO. Also, a little disclaimer, this episode was actually recorded back in February, and so there are some dates in here that no longer apply. I apologize for that, but the rest of the information should still be very relevant to what's happening at the moment in the City of San Jose. And here to speak with us on this episode and shed some light on the details of this position and the office of the city manager as a whole is Kim Walesh. Now, Kim has worked for the City of San Jose for 18 plus years, from being a chief strategist to the director of economic development to deputy city manager. She is a civic entrepreneur and has co-authored 2 books and written more than 50 reports concerning Silicon Valley and innovation-based regions, as well as community development. She's very passionate about creating community through the public realm and public life, including ensuring that community and economic development advances racial equity and expands opportunities for all. She holds a Master of Public Policy on Business and Government from Harvard University, the Kennedy School of Government, and a bachelor's degree in economics and minors in business and Spanish from Valparaiso University. So Kim, thank you so much for joining us. And, can you share a little bit about how you ended up in this role and what inspires you about this work?
Yeah, I think that my overall work has always really been driven by my interest in the common good and in community and what really makes for effective communities. I think both the physical part of that, a community design, as well as the intangible parts of belonging and feeling a sense of community. I think it's deeply rooted. When I was a kid growing up in Wisconsin, we had basements there, which is where all the magic would happen. And I would literally build cities in the basement using my brother's, Lincoln logs and Hot Wheel tracks, and I would make cities. And as I got older, I realized I was very much interested in this general field of community and economic development. And then I became interested in, what does it really take to have a successful community, especially having to respond to all the change and uncertainty. And I became interested in this notion that collaboration is really key and collaborating across sectors. So in college, I sort of put together a lot of my own interests and eventually came up with a major in economics, but I also studied humanities and business and Spanish. Thought I wanted to become a lawyer, and I talked to a bunch of lawyers and decided that would make me miserable.
Every lawyer always says, don't become a lawyer.
I am so glad I dodged that bullet. But I ended up quite randomly learning about public policy school.
Mm.
that you could get a master's degree in public policy. And I did that. And I actually got a merit scholarship. I was a kid from the Midwest, and I got a scholarship to go to Harvard and get a master's degree in public policy, which was really scary and intimidating at the time. But, it changed my life. It opened my world to possibility and networks, and also interest in the international dimensions of community development. So between my 2 years in graduate school at Harvard, I worked in India, in New Delhi. I had this amazing internship with the U.S. aid program there, working in Bangalore, which later became the tech center of India. But while I was in India that summer, I met somebody who worked at the Stanford Research Institute. And so they offered me a job at a group at SRI right after graduation, a group called the Center for Economic Competitiveness. And they worked on economic strategies, half in the US and half overseas, and looked for the lessons learned and the sharing back and forth. So I packed up everything I owned in my little car, and I drove from Boston to California. I didn't know anybody, but it was exciting. So I started my career at SRI, and I was an economic development consultant, with this big firm for 4 years. And then three of us spun out of SRI, and we formed our own company called Collaborative Economics. And Collaborative Economics was about doing the research and doing the strategy to work with cities and chambers and groups that were wrestling with how do we keep competitive and how do we keep our quality of life going. So it was about doing the research, but also the collaboration, right? The leadership part of it, sort of top down and bottom up, so that communities could make their own decisions about how they wanted to move forward. So I had this experience starting in my late 20s of starting and then being managing director of a small business, which was fabulous. But then I started feeling itchy to see if, instead of just being a consultant and being a smart person and advising others what to do, to see if I could actually try to be a leader and make things happen myself. And at this point, I had originally been in San Francisco, and I moved from San Francisco to Palo Alto. And then I found that my heart and the people I really wanted to be with was in San Jose. So I moved from Palo Alto to downtown San Jose. And then a couple of years later, as I was making this transition, I really just stumbled into city government. And it turned out, after the .com had gone bust, the city of San Jose really needed to figure out, well, what was its economic strategy? It didn't have one, quite frankly, and it really needed one. So I took a leave of absence from collaborative economics, and I came into city government, which seemed like a crazy thing to do at the time, like to leave your own business and come into this big, uncertain, probably really bureaucratic organization. But I was excited by the chance. So I took it. I stayed for a year, and I helped San Jose develop their economic strategy with a lot of analysis and a lot of engagement. And then I ended just staying another year and another year because I really fell in love with the city and believed in potential. So I progressed, as you do. If you're good and you're enthusiastic, I progressed from assistant director of economic development to director of economic development. I served as chief strategist when Deb Fagoni was city manager, kind of being her right hand, which was fabulous. And then about 6 years ago, I also became a deputy city manager, overseeing community and economic development. And looking back, I really believe I'm a pretty global person. I love to travel. I think I'm pretty aware and involved. But I really believe that if you want to change the world, you should start with your city. There's so much opportunity to have impact and shape your own little corner of the world to your hopes and your dreams, right, as best you can. So it's really been a privilege to be able to do that, as my paid work. Because I think if I wasn't paid, this wasn't my profession, I would be doing this in my, my spare time anyway. So
Yeah.
I've had
In
a
your
really
closet,
great,
like like I am.
exactly. I really admire that.
That's quite a life, and so much more to go for you. And so I just had some follow. I really liked that you were building cities in your basement, and what a connector that you would be doing that through policy and strategy, later on in life. And it kind of reminds me, so probably a couple decades later, when I was building cities, I was doing it through Sims. I don't know if you're familiar with that game,
Sure.
like Sim City. And that was my first taste of urban planning and like understanding like, oh, I put the school too far. That's why the kids are always late to school. And like
Perfect.
this street is not designed right because the bus always gets stuck there.
Right.
And it was such a great learning tool just about city planning and then neighborhood planning. Um, so when you were at Harvard, do you remember kind of like the gender representation, I guess, in your class and what it was like then, or if that was even kind of like part of I don't know what you would call that, the landscape?
I remember the gender representation being pretty balanced,
Okay.
which was pretty exciting for me because growing up, I did not really have, I would say, professional women role models in my
Mm-hmm.
immediate family or my community. And I went to college at Valparaiso University, which is in Northwest Indiana. There were two of us in the economics program who were women. It was
Yeah.
very small, but it was very male. I mean, in fact,
Mm-hmm.
that's one reason why I've loved San Jose city government is like there's been terrific opportunities for women in management. But that's an interesting question. Yeah, when I got to Harvard, I would say it was quite balanced.
Mm-hmm.
What was great for me was there were so many students from other countries all
Mm-hmm.
around the world.
Oh,
And that was
yeah.
that was new for me, just to be able to interact with the whole world, in
Mm-hmm.
your class. I learned so much
Okay.
from people who came from everywhere.
Yeah, that must have been, it's kind of like almost like the class is also part of the experience, the learning experience, and to have such a diverse class, I'm sure it really fed into like the the schooling that you received.
No, you're absolutely right. I think especially with graduate school, you learn
Hmm.
so much more just from being in the presence of the other students, and
Yeah, and
I
I guess
learned
the
that
whole
a lot.
thesis too of graduate school is like, okay, what is your thesis? Like, what do you want to test out?
Yeah, exactly.
um, For listeners, tuning in for the first time on this topic, can you discuss some of like the main functions of a city manager's office in the city of San Jose? And specifically, there's like when looking at the org chart, there's like a number of city managers with different name variations, and what does that all mean?
Sure. We have what's called a council manager form of government. And in that form of government, the mayor and the council, they set the vision, they set the strategy, and they make the policies, but they hire a city manager. And the
Mm-hmm.
city manager's office and the departments really provide the management expertise, right? The professional expertise to lead the city organization.
Mm-hmm.
So there's only one city manager, like at the top, right?
Okay.
And he, in this case, we have had San Jose's had women city managers. We've had city managers who've been people of color. We've
Mm-hmm.
been had a really great set of city managers. So Dave Sykes is our current city manager,
Mm-hmm.
and his job is to really three things. The first is to support and manage all the daily operations of the city,
Mm-hmm.
right? Make sure the city is functioning, the facilities are functioning, the services are being delivered, everybody's doing what they need to do and has the support to do it. The second thing the city manager is responsible for is supporting the council's decision making.
Mm-hmm.
So all the work that we do to make recommendations and write memos and do all the analysis that the council and its committees need to make informed decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And the third thing the city manager does is implement the policy direction that's provided by council, right? So every Tuesday, council is making decisions, making policy. The city manager's job to make sure that the whole organization is then implementing those policies, that there's appropriate follow-up. And so in a city of San Jose, right, it's the 10th largest city in the US, our organization is big, right? It's well over 6,000 employees, $3 billion budget when you look at the operating budget and the capital investment budget. So the city manager is responsible for managing all of that in a professional way. So of course, we have this concept of the city manager's office, right? Because none of us do anything alone. So there's a city manager at the top of the organization who reports to the mayor and council. The mayor, he has a special relationship with the mayor because the mayor is obviously the strong guiding force. But the city manager is responsible for supporting the decision making and providing information and being responsive to the entire city council and the mayor. So there's an assistant city manager who is Jennifer McGuire, and the assistant city manager functions like the COO, like the chief operating organization, tends to kind of make sure things like administrative things and HR things and work plan things, and everybody knows what they're doing. And then there are 4 deputy city managers. And each of those 4 deputy city managers has a set of substantive responsibilities. So like I said, my responsibilities are things that have to do with community and economic development. But other city managers are focused on emergency response or transportation or the airport or utilities or civic innovation. So we have what we call enterprise priorities, which are our priorities that we're working on, but they're divvied up across the 4 city managers, deputy city managers, right? And then each of us deputy city managers have some departments that we're responsible for supporting. So I support housing and economic development, planning, building, code enforcement, those departments that are all involved in the growth and change in the city. So within the city manager's office, there are also some sub-offices, right? So things like the budget office is part of the city manager's office. The emergency management function, that's all this responding to COVID or will respond to floods or earthquakes, that's a team that's part of the city manager's office. Communications is part of the city manager's office. And of course, our new Office of Racial Equity is part of the city manager's office. So you have the city manager, assistant city manager, 4 deputy city managers, and you have these offices. And then below that, you have the city departments, right? And the city departments might range from 50 person, it'd be a small department, up to 400, 500, 600 people, larger departments like environmental services or public works. And so each one of those departments has a department director. And the city manager is responsible for hiring those department directors. And those department directors report to the city manager, including, say, the police chief. Now, city council will bless or approve those appointments, but they really report to the city manager. And every week, the city manager, the deputy city managers, department heads, we all get together in a meeting every week to coordinate what's happening, especially with the council agenda that's coming up. So we very much function as a collaborative team, a city manager's team with the department heads.
Okay. Analogy-wise, is it comparable for the city managers, like almost like the chief operating? I know you mentioned that there is an assistant city manager that's already like the COO, but just for people to kind of maybe transpose that in something that they're more familiar with, is it like similar to?
To me, it's more like a CEO. It's a CEO that will report to the board of directors. And in this case, the board of directors is like the city council, with the mayor being the chairman of the board.
Okay.
Right? So the chairman of the board has a special relationship with the CEO, but the CEO is hired and fired by the whole board and accountable to the whole board. That's
Okay.
more how I think about it, Elise.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense to me. I'm familiar with that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so now on to the topic of budgets. Can you walk us through, the timeline in preparing and adopting the annual budget?
Yeah, I've been through this like 18 times now. So it feels like it takes almost the whole year, and it's
Okay.
actually an ongoing process. But I'd say, well, generally, the city has a fiscal year that starts on every July 1st is a new fiscal year. So right now we're planning for, it's called fiscal year 21-22. So I think the process, in my mind, it generally starts in November, where there's an initial forecast of how's the budget going to look next year. And we actually forecast out 5 years.
Okay.
And in particular, is there going to be a surplus or is there going to be a deficit? And most of the years, ever since I joined the city,
oh man, what a year! 2020
deficits, right?
Yeah.
We had the dot-com bust, we had the Great Recession, we had the end of redevelopment, we had this period where like the retirement costs were just going through the roof. So then what happens is, and it's hopefully someday San Jose will be beyond this, but so then what happens is around the holiday time, the city manager says to the department heads, we need to start planning for what we're going to cut or what we're going to add, right? If it's a positive year. So, so there's a forecast and then there's sort of general direction of how things are going to look. And if we're going to be able to have to cut or be able to add. Also, you'll see this on February 25th. Around January or February, the city council, the last several years, has had a priority setting process. So that's an initial opportunity for the council to start thinking and saying, these are priorities, especially for things that they might want to change in the budget, like to emphasize more or emphasize less. So that happens, the priority setting process. And it's really the mayor that sort of starts the process because the mayor issues something called the March budget message. It comes out in early March, and it says to the city manager, you're going to compile the budget, but this is what I would like to see in it in terms of especially new or changed priorities. So the March budget message comes out. Then the city manager proposes the budget. And he proposes the budget based on input from all of the departments. And the departments, they get input from the employees, from anybody who wants to have some input. But then departments have to propose, again, especially things that could be cut or could be added, those change things. So there's a city manager's proposed budget. That comes out it's like late April. Then in May, there are a series of called budget study sessions where we will, with the council for 4 or 5 days, study the proposed budget. And then council members then have the opportunity to say what they might want changed or added or deleted. And then the next to last thing that happens is in June, there's the mayor's June budget message. And so that's like the mayor has now at this point taken everything into account and he is proposing like, this is the final way I think we should, package we should put together. And then the council will vote toward the end of June on that mayor's recommendation. And sometimes they change it Sometimes they don't, but they often,
Yeah.
there's that little bit of back and forth.
Okay.
And so then by the end of June, everybody's exhausted, the budget's adopted. And then generally there's a recess of the council. They take a break in
Yeah.
July.
Mm-hmm.
But the fiscal year will start around July 1st.
Mm-hmm.
And then departments know what's funded, and they
Mm-hmm.
can kind of continue on their way. And then the whole process will start up again with a forecast in November. So it's a continuous process.
Okay. Not to kind of go back and summarize a little bit. So the mayor in his March message kind of sets the objectives for the city manager's office, and then they work with their department heads to kind of begin studying, preparing that. You had mentioned that council members are also doing their own priority settings, I guess, within their districts. And so I might have missed where the rest of the council districts kind of fit into after the March mayor's message in March.
Yeah, good question. So, and every council member does it differently, but
Mm-hmm.
generally they all want to hear from their constituents, what
Mm-hmm.
are the priority issues? They're hearing that constantly. On February 25th, when we have the council priority setting session for the budget, there's clearly opportunity for public comment at that
Mm-hmm.
session, and council members are definitely starting to listen to their constituents. Generally, in the April-May timeframe,
Mm-hmm.
their council members will have a meeting or two or some mechanism in their districts to hear what people think of the city manager's proposed budget. We'll explain what the budget is, what are some of the changes that are being proposed, and then people will have an opportunity to react. But it's up to the council members.
Okay.
District 3 council member Raul Perales has, for I think his whole term, operated an initiative that he's really pushed called D3 Decides.
Yes.
And it's a participatory budget process where there's a small amount of money that he sets aside for these kind of very micro projects.
Yeah.
Things that could happen in very specific locations, and he allows
like
his
License
constituents.
Alley, I think. Yeah. Was that?
Yeah, could
that was
come
part of
from that process. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's done it probably the last three years now. So in his case, his constituents have something very specific they can be involved with in addition to just the overall city budget.
Yeah. I used to work in D3, and I remember those newsletters that came out around that time. But D3 Decides, yeah.
Yeah, and it's important for people to feel like they can actually decide specific things that will then happen.
Yeah. Well, like you said, collaborative, those are the best outcomes when it's a collaborative decision-making process.
Yeah.
And so, if you had some suggestions on the best place for community members to engage in this process, like you mentioned, the February 25th, which is Thursday, next Thursday, that is one opportunity. And then to look out, I would say, for the March newsletter, and then also check in probably with their council member and seeing how each one does that.
Yeah, I think that's the best thing, to follow your council member, and or the mayor, right? You can go to the city website, sanjoseca.gov /your-government, if you're not sure who your council member is, but follow, on social media or sign up for the email of your council member, and the mayor. I would really recommend both. Then you'll be invited and you'll get information.
Okay. So going back to the city manager's office and kind of the department, different roles of departments in preparing the annual budget, can you walk us through the roles of the city manager's office versus the roles of the department and how those details work?
So the city manager's office, as I said, through the city manager's budget office, will, and it's always right before the holidays, which is hard, they'll say to the department, so this year we want you to develop proposals for how to cut your budget, cut your general fund budget by X percent, say by 5% or 10%.
Okay.
So then the department directors have about 6 weeks to work with their teams to come up with, well, where could be more efficient, or where should we stop doing something, or how are we going to reduce? And then department heads submit those proposals to the city manager's budget office. So it's really the role of the budget office and the city manager's team to then look at all of those proposals and see the big picture and the trade-offs. And sometimes it's a very iterative process going back to the department heads and sort of pull together a recommended budget that responds to the mayor's March budget message in terms of the priorities, but really is grounded, especially in times where we're cutting, about how do we minimize impacts? How do we, look at what's best for everybody, especially when you have to reduce the budget when the needs are strong and growing. It's a very difficult thing to do.
So then, are there specific staff in each department that prepare the budget, or is there a process to involve like feedback from department employees?
Yeah, good. The city manager always tells the department heads that they need to have a way to receive feedback from employees and also to keep them informed. So there's different ways that departments do that. Every department has something called an administrative officer, an AO, and the administrative officer is the one that, knows the details of the budget and would be responsible for pulling together the documents and understanding the direction, but would work very closely with the department director and the management team.
Okay. And is there, how do you measure the success of a budget? Are there data and metrics that you use to track the budget?
Good question. That's always the question. Yeah. So the budget is actually a document. It's like we call it the budget book, right? So in the draft budget book and the final one that is adopted, there are performance measures. For every department has certain core services, things that it does, like economic development. One of our services is, business outreach and communication. Another one might be, supporting the cultural community and the cultural facilities. Each one of those core services has performance measures that are reported in the budget process. And then also, you may have noticed toward the end of every year, the city auditor issues something called the Service Efforts and Accomplishments Report, the SEA report. That's a very public document that summarizes at a very high level. It's kind of interesting to flip through. So what were the call response rates for the fire department last year? And, what did it end up costing to have the garbage picked up? And, there's all sorts of performance indicators in there as well.
And that was the Service
Efforts and Accomplishments Report. It's put out by the auditor every year. And matter of fact, I think it was in January or February, just recently, the auditor presents it to the city council. He presents it first to the city manager and the senior staff. We have an opportunity to review it, make sure it's accurate. But then the auditor publishes that. It's a public document really to the people and to the city council.
Okay. And the budget book, is that something that's public as well?
Oh, yes. Yes. You can find it online. I mean, I'm joking because of COVID last year, it shrunk in terms of size. And
I can only imagine.
COVID, it was about 3 inches thick. And I honestly doubt anybody ever reads the whole thing, but it's a resource document, so everything's in there. And I think it's searchable. But yeah, it is a very large document.
Okay. Is the title called the budget book, or is there a different document name that I should be looking for?
It's probably, good question. It's
okay. I mean, I can also, if you send it to me.
City of San Jose Adopted Operating Budget.
Okay.
That's what it would be called. There's an operating budget, and then there's a capital budget, right? And a capital budget is like the big investment stuff, and that looks 5 years. But the document you'd be talking about would just be called the city's adopted operating budget.
Okay. All right. So sticking to budget still. So last year, City Council voted to create an equity fund to help target inequity in city services. Do you have any thoughts on the progress of this program?
Yeah, so it's been a really interesting and important journey that the city manager, the administration side of the house has been on, going back well over 3 years ago, where we decided to participate in the government alliance on race and equity. In order to understand and have more of us inside city government kind of really understand what structural and institutional racism is and how and why it exists and how to spot it and how to have awareness of the things that we can do inside city government to change it or reverse it or prevent it. So part of that has been some approaches that we've developed for budgeting for equity, which we started last year on a kind of a pilot basis. But this year, now that we have Sulma Maciel, who's the director of our Office of Racial Equity, and we have a small team there, we are working on something called budgeting for equity. How do you build equity considerations into the budget process? So remember I told you that departments are asked to submit proposals for how to cut the budget and what to add to the budget. Well, this year the city manager told them explicitly to use a racial equity lens. And we've given departments support on how to do that. So just at a basic level, departments have to ask the question, how is your budget proposal going to impact the well-being of the community, especially people of color and low-income people in the community? And so you need to ask the question, who is this going to benefit and who is it going to potentially hurt? And if it's going to hurt, how can we mitigate that, the negative side? So departments are being asked to and being supported in using data. Like, how do you get data on a disaggregated basis, right, by geography and by race and by ethnicity that can guide the development of budget proposals? So we've done a lot of work on that and created some tools, including the San Jose Equity Atlas, which is available to departments to get that like fine-grained data that you need, right, to be able to look at things by race and ethnicity, and then to the extent possible, asking departments to center community voices and to listen to the people who we're trying to affect positively about what they think would be best for them. So, led by the Office of Racial Equity, we're starting to figure out how do you build a racial equity lens into the budget process, right? And being mindful that, especially when you're cutting budgets, who will benefit and who could be burdened by these decisions, right? And to make sure that we're using demographic data disaggregated by race, by income, by geography. So that's a requirement this year, and then that will be shared with City Council. Again, last year, because we were in the middle of COVID and we didn't have really the time and bandwidth, we did pulled a team together that had been through the GARE training, the racial equity training, and they did do an analysis of our budget proposal. But this year, now it's deeper because it's starting with the departments and the department proposals. And the departments are being supported to do this right.
And is there in terms of the equity fund and what city services those funds are applied to, is there a community engagement process in this realm of the work that you're doing right now? Or where might, if that possibility exists, where might residents or organizations that might want to share their resources, their studies and stuff like that with the city?
Yeah, I think, I don't know the details of that. I think it's still being worked out.
Okay.
And I think I would contact the Office of Racial Equity
Mm-hmm.
in the city manager's office. The director is Sulma Maciel. I know she's just hired one person who I believe started last week, and she's in the process of hiring another one. So they're sort of staffing up. Most of the work that we've done so far has been internal, right? Like training of city staff and conversations and planning. But I suspect that soon, when they have more capacity, then the work will also be external as well as internal.
Okay. And then lastly on that topic, do you think there's any, what further opportunities to address inequity through the city budget?
Well, I think it's just I think addressing equity is everywhere, right? So the budget is really important because a budget allocates resources.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, it's sort of a de facto influence on priorities.
Yeah.
But I think almost everything that we're doing these days, most people are sincerely trying to bring that equity lens and ask those questions, whether it's thinking about, the development of the Diridon Station area or hiring and promoting of employees. So I think it's just really important for people to be involved. And these days, I think being involved, it doesn't necessarily have to mean going to meetings, right? Because there can't be meetings anymore. So I think the blessing is we've figured out other ways to get input from people, and they're not always perfect.
Yeah.
But online, online meetings, of course, but there's online surveys. There's a lot more information online and use of video. So people that want to learn and want to participate and communicate, think they can.
Okay. Great. I'm looking forward to that. And I know that it's, the beginning year, so there's a lot of details being worked out, but it's good to hear that that is also, something that they will eventually address as well in terms of engagement. So, the Charter Review Committee is currently evaluating the powers and organizational structure of the city. How might that impact the roles and responsibilities and business practices of the city manager if the city shifts to, the strong mayor form of government versus its current city council city manager model?
Well, depending on the commission's recommendation, it could be a very significant change, a very fundamental and far-reaching change. Like I said earlier, our form of government is a council manager form of government. And under that form, the mayor is on the city council, is the guiding force on the city council. City council and mayor together, they set policy and set direction. And then the city manager supports their work and make sure it's all implemented, really providing professional management to run the city. What the idea is to switch potentially to a mayor council form of government, which is more like you might see in the federal government, where the mayor does not go to the city council meetings at all, right? The city council is just like the legislative body, like Congress. And the mayor, he's the CEO. The mayor is responsible for operating the city, and all of the people report up to the mayor. And the mayor then appoints the department heads and the city manager, and that becomes his cabinet. So the council manager form of government is the newer form. It was actually put in place in the 1920s in the progressive era in the U.S. there was a municipal reform movement to respond to some of the problems with inefficiency and lack of professional management and outright corruption, right, in certain cities like Chicago. So our form of government was sort of a response to an extreme version of the mayor council form. So it would be a very significant change. And the major change is the balance of power shifts between the mayor and the council. So the council has a lot less power because and it has a lot less access to information and support, because the city manager no longer supports the mayor and council, is just accountable to the mayor. So in my view, it concentrates the power in the mayor, which some people think that's a good thing, but it's taking that power from the council and the people's representation on the council. Honestly, I'm a fan of our form of government. I think it allows more continuity of strategy over time. It minimizes the role of politics in implementing things. Right now, if council wants to say, stop working on that trail program, they have to do that in a public way. In a strong mayor form of government, the mayor has the power to sort of reach in and direct staff to do things or not do certain things. And again, some people think that's a benefit, but it also, I think, can have a serious downside if there aren't important checks and balances in place.
Yeah.
I also like that the department heads now have a very collegial and collaborative relationship. Other big cities, if you talk to your colleagues in San Francisco and LA, everybody's reporting right to the mayor. There can be a lot of competition and conflict, and we have a very professional, collegial, collaborative kind of environment.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned continuity, because that's exactly what I was thinking about, because then that would, from my perspective, really shift the powers every 4 years, depending on who we get into that seat. And it kind of breaks with the process of building on top of each administration in a collaborative way versus a person who, I don't know, might want to come and change everything. And then there's an opponent in the next 4 years who wants to come back and change everything back.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Alina. And if you run for mayor and it's a strong mayor form, people expect you to make your mark. So there'd be more pressure. And again, you could have some checks and balances in place maybe, but like out with what that prior person did and in with my program. And one of the reasons why I think San Jose's been successful is that we put these strategies in place and that we follow them, right? Whether it's a climate change strategy or a build out the bike network strategy,
yes,
or
please,
a park strategy or downtown strategy, change and improvement take patience and take time and take focus. So in my view, one of the reasons I've liked working for the city is I've seen us be able to be strategic and just execute over a long period of time without going back and forth and changing focus, which you end up accomplishing nothing sometimes in those cases. So that's one of the things I would want the Charter Commission to really consider, is that how do you have continuity of strategy and also continuity of staff, and how are you going to attract and retain people to come work for a strong mayor form of government, because it'll attract, especially at the top, a very different kind of person that is attractive to a council manager form of government. So continuity of talent and retention of talent, I think, should be an important consideration as well.
Okay. So this kind of ties in one of my last two questions. And so some of the arguments of switching from the mayor council form to the council city manager form is one of the main arguments I've seen is inefficiency, addressing inefficiency. But from my perspective, I don't really see, it's not really a genuine addressing of the inefficiency, because you're just like, well, there's too many people to talk to. It's too complicated. So just make it one person to talk to, and that solves the problem. But that doesn't. It seems like the problem is communication. And we both know that, in city governance, the lack of technology investment and like capital that we have to invest in these types of improvements to communication. So, from your perspective of having been in the city manager's office and knowing how communication works, maybe that is an approach that we should be looking at. What is your perspective on what other opportunities that you see for the Charter Review Commission to be reviewing at this time? You mentioned continuity, but is there anything else that you would add to that for them?
Well, I think San Jose is an extremely efficient, well-run city now. I mean, I think, we are so constrained fiscally. We have, and we are going to be for a long time because of our land use patterns, where we have all this housing and such a small job pace. So we have a very few employees per capita compared to other major cities. And yet our performance, our bond ratings, we're very highly ranked city. So my concern is, if you have a city that is very well run now by, objective outside standards looking at it compared to other big cities, if you're going to make a change, please understand what is the problem you're trying to solve and what will be made better and what could be put at risk. What could lose things that you are valued highly right now if you're not careful. That's my view. You talked about technology, so we have had this era now where we finally have had good leadership in the city with Rob Lloyd and Kip Harkness on technology and innovation. And finally support of the council, especially on the budget process. So we've done things like the 311, the My San Jose 311 app. We're making massive changes in the permitting technology that so people can understand where is their permit and who do they need to talk to. And so we're paying a lot of catch up, even just working at home. During COVID, we accelerated the use of iPads and technology for, say, building inspectors. We're doing remote inspections by video. So we're getting much better. We were definitely not looking like the capital of Silicon Valley at all. But I would say in 5 years, we've made a big leap forward, including a whole revamping of the city's website to make it more user-friendly. It used to be organized like by departments, not by what you want to do. Now you can go in there and the bot and you can say, I want to get a permit for my street festival, and you'll get right where you need. So clearly lots of room for improvement. But those are things that I don't think depend on the form of government. Those just depend on good management and on investment.
Okay. And also, I guess, some considerations that are unprecedented at the moment is that every city budget is suffering significantly right now because of COVID. And so if there's any kind of challenge points that you're seeing in the last, year of going through this that, the Charter Review Commission maybe could also consider. I don't know if that makes sense, that question.
Again, I think the Charter Commission needs to focus on the charter issues, which are underlying issues of, I think, where the power and where the accountability lies. Again, these other things, you could ask yourself, if a mayor was responsible for the COVID response, regardless of who that mayor is, would it have been any different, better, or worse than the city manager, right? And the Office of Emergency Services. I think what we learned during COVID was when you have resources and you have focus, what you can accomplish. Like, quite frankly, we had those significant federal CARES Act resources last fall and state resources. So we were able to do these like little bridge mini home communities for our homeless population, right, and pilot those on a rapid basis. We were able to get direct financial assistance to renters, and were able to build a countywide program to make sure that there was food security. And so those federal resources were critical. So that's why we're just thrilled the Biden package, needs to pass soon, because we're going to be very dependent on those resources for basic security of the 20% of our families that are still just really struggling to survive, but then also to put recovery programs in place, especially for our small business community, and to retrain people and reemploy them, because some of those jobs in hotel and hospitality and meetings and conventions, they're not going to be coming back for years, right? So we need to really invest in retraining and maybe even create some public employment programs like the WPA programs, right, that we had last century. What's the equivalent of that going to be?
And I really loved how the city and the community really came together for artists and like holding the moment. I think that was really important for us. And I love seeing how that turned out. Also love the name, and it's just capturing all that, because that's part of this is going to go down in the history books. This is what happened last year and this year. And so I was really proud to be able to see, the City of San Jose really stepping up.
That was our fabulous cultural affairs staff led by Carrie Adams-Hapner, recognizing that you're right, Alina, like we're going through a thing, like a historically significant, difficult thing. So people need to process that even while they're going through it and express themselves. But also, we need to get money to artists.
Yes,
so let's come up with a program where we can pay, 100 of them to do what they're probably doing anyways in their rooms, expressing themselves. But let's give them something to shoot for, and let's pay them properly.
Yes, I agree. So, what in a different world, but maybe not too different from this one, what would equitable community engagement look like to you if we could imagine a process, where the red tape was tackled and it was achievable, like some like technology, data, like what would you envision?
Well, I think of equitable community engagement. I think that is like the people who are in need of help and could most be impacted, whether it's negatively or positively, by any decisions, having a real voice, right? Like how can we create situations where we can really not just share information with them, but really listen to their experience and their thoughts. And for 3 years now, we've had resources through the Google Dear Dawn work to try a lot of things for more inclusive community engagement. And they don't all work, but we have learned, first of all, the importance of partnering with community-based organizations, because those organizations they're closest to the people, right? So whether that's OXA or PACT or Solos Mayfair, we've funded these CBOs to do surveys, to facilitate forums, to convene, and that's been effective. I think also we've realized you have to go to where people are. And so pre-COVID, that meant showing up at neighborhood festivals and events and farmers markets. And you have to give people a variety of ways that they can participate. So again, the good thing about COVID is we've created these ways to get input without having to physically go to City Hall or go to a meeting. So, you can be cooking dinner and watching your kids, and you can be listening and calling into a city council meeting or taking a survey, or we created like little videos and just posted them, and people download them. Like, what's going on in the Deer Dawn Station area? I care about transportation, or I care about affordable housing. Well, here's a 5-minute video, and you can learn what you need to learn. Also, language. right? Because we're
Yeah.
online now, we have interpretation services for most of our meetings. So I think equitable, inclusive engagement, it's trying a lot of different things. But the most important, I think, is that when you get input, you have to then go back to the community and share with them, well, what happened as a result of me giving
Yeah.
my input? And it doesn't mean like we in city government, we can't take everybody's input and agree to all of it and accept all of it and make everybody happy.
Yeah.
But we have a huge obligation to sort through it and to say, yes, these ideas, like these ideas about affordable housing, we agree. We heard you and we modified the project. Like, I want you to see how your input made a difference. Or if these ideas, gosh, they're just not going to work. But here's why. And, just you need to give people the respect of feedback. What happened to their ideas or their input that they shared? I think we've gotten a lot better at that.
Yes, I definitely seen it. And I've definitely felt, since 2020 that the public meetings have been much more accessible. And it's easier for me to attend because I don't have to block off my day and physically go there. And so I really appreciate that. And I hope that part stays forever.
Good. I mean, I hope it's both, right? I hope that people who want to come to a meeting can come to a meeting, but at the same time, just like I hope if I want to go to the theater, I can go to the theater. But if I need to stay home that night, I could also watch it online while the live performance is happening. I think we'll have more of those, in real world and digital experiences happening simultaneously. And we'll have to figure out how both groups of participants feel valued and then maybe how they can interact with each other. But I agree. I agree with you.
Okay, so lastly, any PSAs or, words of encouragement for our listeners and everyday residents who are looking to participate and engage in their local government more, which can be daunting and scary at sometimes, but yeah.
Yeah, I think just start with something small that's a connection that you have or a project or an issue that you find meaningful. You don't have to take on all of city government or take on the big issues. I mean, most people I find they start with something. Sometimes it's the PTA. Sometimes it's neighborhood cleanup. Sometimes it's a cyclist, and I want better bikeways. And so the departments all have, most of them have ways that you can sign up and here, like if you're into housing or you're into transportation or you're into planning. I mean, one suggestion is just to approach that department. How can I get on lists of meetings and how can I follow your activities on social? So I think just start wherever you are. And one thing will lead to another, and just follow your passions and follow your heart and just keep asking questions. Like I said in the beginning, I think these big global issues and even national issues, they seem so big sometimes, but we can make a big difference in our world just by starting with our city or starting with our neighborhood or starting with our block. And great cities, great communities, they're not created by government. I mean, I'm biased, obviously, from 18 years. I believe we have an exceptional city government and the people who work in city government. We have a great city government, and I hope people in our community are proud of that. But great cities happen because people from all walks of life, get involved and solve problems and make the community. Government is a part of it, but the people are even the bigger part of it.
Yeah.
So I'm really thankful for you doing this podcast, and I hope it's encouraging of others to take a small step, to be involved in figuring out what the common good is and having those sometimes difficult conversations where our values might conflict or where we need to make important trade-offs. The more people that are involved more thoughtfully, the better, because it's not easy to manage a city of 1 million people.
That was, I feel like it was always peculiar to me that in American government in high school that like our education stopped at the state level. Like we never went into cities,
Really?
and there was never an explanation of what you can do in your city and in your community, which is such a, I think, a loss of opportunity because as a teenager, I just think of like the state of California. I was like, well, I'm not going to go over there, so there's nothing for me to do.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And if you look at the like what really affects your life on a
hmm
daily basis, it's way
Yeah.
more your city than your state or your nation. But if
hmm
you look at all the taxes you pay and where the money goes, right, like when you pay your sales tax, like
hmm
roughly 9%, do you know only 1% of that actually goes to the city of San Jose?
I did
Vast
not know
majority all
that.
goes to the state. Or like when you pay your personal income tax, it
hmm
all goes to the state, right? Cities don't
hmm
get any personal income tax or any corporate income tax. We just get a little bit of the sales tax and a little bit of the property tax. So we do a lot that affects people's life
Yeah.
for really relatively little share of the tax base that we
Yeah.
all
That's
pay.
interesting because I guess the way that tax base is set up and what cities receive from it, it really sets the objective for each city to be housing and business, I guess maybe focused because that's the more they build out, I guess their percentage stays the same, but the amount might go up a little bit. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's interesting. Sales tax and property tax are the two main sources of
Mm-hmm.
city government funding.
Mm-hmm.
And sales tax, you only get the sales tax if you have retailers in your community or
Mm-hmm.
businesses that get business to business sales tax. If you
Mm-hmm.
just have a large population and that population goes to the next city
Mm-hmm.
to buy stuff, you don't get any support. You have to
Yeah.
have the retail in your community. And then same thing with property tax. Property tax is interesting. We pay people pay property taxes on their homes,
Mm-hmm.
right? But that's limited, has a limited increase to 2% a year. So when
Mm-hmm.
you're a city like San Jose that has all like the single family housing stock that's older, that's
Mm-hmm.
constrained in growth under Prop 13, we lose money
Mm-hmm.
on single family homes. We generate less tax revenue than it costs us to service them with police and
Mm-hmm.
libraries and parks
Yeah.
and all of that. So that's why cities need to have employment lands
Mm-hmm.
because the employment lands generate the revenue that
Mm-hmm.
funds the services for all of the residents. But San Jose, because it's had such strong interest in housing, has converted so much of its land that
Mm-hmm.
was employment to residential that we are
Yeah.
down to only 12% of our land is
Mm-hmm.
employment lands. If you look at cities like Palo Alto, Santa Clara, Mountain View, it's like 30%,
Yeah.
which is why San Jose is going to remain fiscally constrained probably forever because of all those decisions that past councils made
Mm-hmm.
um, related to land use. So our strategy is to build more housing
Mm-hmm.
and to protect those employment lands that we have. And the
Mm-hmm.
higher density housing that we build, we hope will pay for itself over
Mm-hmm.
time because
Okay.
it's denser.
Yeah. I think this almost comes back to like full circle of Sim City and building a city in your basement and making sure
Yeah,
that the land use is appropriate and supportive of a thriving community.
right. So we talk about like the industrial lands that we have are down to like 2%. So
Mm-hmm.
if you get rid of all those, where are you going to go to get your car repaired? Where is the
Yeah.
recycling going to happen in your
Mm-hmm.
community? Where's the, you know, where's the metal fabricating going to be
Yeah.
that's critical for the semiconductor industry?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever, right?
Yeah.
So you're right. If in Sim City it's all about the balance and the
Mm-hmm.
interdependencies of the city system. You drive one of those things out, whole city can
Yeah.
malfunction.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for folks that are not into this stuff as much as I know I am. I think an analogy that I use often is like I live in one of the older neighborhoods in Midtown, and I have a corner bodega, but I also have like my dry cleaners, and I have, Babe's muffler. So everything is within walking distance. And if they were to disappear, then that would make me use my car more often, and like it'd be a little bit more of a hassle to go get things done.
Right.
But if we think about it as a, 10 blocks by 10 block kind of level, is making sure that within those blocks you have everything that you need.
Totally right, Alina. That's it. I mean, cities around the world are trying to create they call it the 20-minute city, right?
Mm-hmm.
The little neighborhoods where you live one, I live in one. I can do almost everything I need within 20 minutes, ideally walk, bike, or transit. So why would we intentionally start driving out some of those things?
Yeah.
Right? You have to be very, very careful because all around the world, people are trying to build those 20-minute neighborhoods.
Yeah. I think in Copenhagen, like they're going to like, we're going to do the 7-minute block or like 7-minute city. And I was like, that's impressive.
That sounds good.
Okay. So I think that was everything. Thank you so much for your time. This was a lovely conversation. I learned a ton. And so I'm really glad that I was able to sit down with you and speak with you.
Thank you. You asked such good questions. And thank you for doing this podcast. I think it's so important for people to get to know their city and some of the people that love their city equally and are trying to do good, working together. So thank you, Alina, for having me.
Yeah. I started this because like your suggestion, I started small. I wanted to be more engaged, and I lived down the street from the Diridon station. So I was like, I'm going to go to the local community engagement meeting. And I was like trying to study. I was like, okay, there's so many moving parts. This is a very complex project. Like, how did it start? It's like, with the planning commission. I was like, what's the planning commission?
Oh, good.
And then I went up there, and then I found out there's like so many commissions. So I thought I would start there because we have a large vacancy. Like I now sit on the Council Appointment Advisory Commission.
Oh, okay.
And we don't get that many applications because it's like more process council. But like there's always openings on commissions, and so I'm always pushing that. So.
No, it's so important. And to get more young people and more diverse people. And like you're right, more civics education about how local government works, because none of us got that growing up, and it just doesn't like pop in your head. But so keep asking the questions you're asking and unpack the mystery of it for more people. That's really a great public service you're providing.
Thank you. I'm really happy. I really enjoy this work, and I'm lucky to be able to do that right now.
Excellent. Thanks, Alina.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
Great. Good job.